All right, we begin here. Striking National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union members say that they are determined now more than ever to make their concerns heard. At a media briefing earlier today, the union vowed to intensify protests from tomorrow until its demands are met. It is accusing the government of being arrogant during negotiations. The union is demanding a 10% wage hike, but the government offered 4.7%. Operations have been disrupted at various health facilities countrywide since the strike began last Monday. The Labour Appeal Court, meanwhile, will decide on Monday on the union's appeal against the interdict by government to try and stop the strike.
The negotiators of employer made the U-turn when we thought that we are registering progress by indicating that they are no longer interested in negotiating a settlement agreement to resolve the impasse. The employer arrogantly demanded that we must drop the dispute process and return to the council to engage on the 2023-2024 public service wage negotiations. Again, this is another demonstration of how far government is prepared to undermine and collapse collective bargaining and the dispute resolution mechanism by imposing their will on workers. We are aware that certain ministers inside the mandating committee of the employer have refused to support the new minister, Umamonotolo Kivit, to resolve the impasse. Instead, they engage in tactics to divide unions, and we want to warn them that this approach is regressive and will collapse public service. At the onset of the facilitation process, we were upfront in trying to resolve the dispute by tabling a proposed settlement agreement which entails, among others, cessation of hostilities, which was meant to see parties agreeing on resolving the strike and talking to relevant issues linked to hostilities. 2, defending the council and collective bargaining, which meant that the parties will agree on defending the SABC and as such the unions that are currently not part of the 2023-2024 round of collective bargaining to return to the council and participate fully. 3, augmentation of the 2020 salary increase, which meant that the state having unilaterally implemented 3% salary increase for 2020-2023 financial year will augment at least 3% with a percentage to be agreed by parties. For minimum service level agreement, that parties agrees that the long outstanding issue of the minimum service level agreement be concluded in council within the period of 6 months. As Nehawu, we want to register that it's becoming quite clear to us that despite all our efforts to resolve the dispute, the government is not interested in concluding the 2022-2023 dispute, as they argue that they have closed and concluded the negotiations in that financial year. This was despite the fact that there was no resolution for that financial year, but rather a unilateral implementation of the 3%, which was way below the CPI. With this arrogance displayed by government, it is important to confirm that Nehawu continues with the strike in a more intensified manner as from tomorrow, Monday, the 13th March 2023, to demonstrate to government the seriousness with which we take the concerted efforts to underplay the role and the significance of public servants who are at the coalface of service delivery.
All right. Well, our reporter Katlego Legodi was at the briefing then this morning, and he joins us live now. Very good afternoon to you, Katlego. Okay, let's talk about where we are at the moment. We've heard government urging the unions, to return to the negotiating table. Where are we now, and what did we get out of that press briefing that you just attended?
Good afternoon, Flo, and good afternoon to our viewers at home. The workers saying that never at any point did they abandon the process of bargaining. Actually, they've been championing the process of bargaining, inviting the employer to come back to the bargaining table and negotiate with them in good faith. So we saw them actually give us a briefing earlier on, an update really on where we are following a week of intense strike action by Nehawu members nationwide. That strike action just now is pointing to it going into the second week, and they're saying that at least at this point in time they've not found each other with the employer. Going into this weekend as well, they were hoping that there at the bargaining council they'll get some sort of a movement from the employer, looking at the fact that now we have a new minister, Minister Katlego Legodi, who joins the Department of Public Service and Administration as a minister there, following the acting minister Thulasing, who at this point in time is not one person that is a favorite of the workers, looking at the fact that last year already they had started with picketing, they had started with demonstrations, delivering various memorandums of demands that have led to them deciding that they're now going on a nationwide strike action in terms of withdrawing their labor. That demonstration in the week, we saw it just turning ugly at some point in some facilities, health facilities, and that is one thing that they also wanted to clarify, to say that really at this point in time, government has been going on a campaign to also portray them as violent people, and saying that government is seemingly declaring war on the workers, looking at the fact that instead of actually negotiating with them in good faith, they saw last year already a 3% imposed on them, that 3% that was unilaterally imposed on them by the employer, saying that they are not willing to enter into the fresh round of talks for a new salaries when there's still that outstanding at 3% or 10% that they've been calling for from last year, where government gave them a 3%. So today we saw them just also giving us an update of where they are in terms of the matter, the legal matter that is underway right now, because we know that as soon as they made an announcement that they are going on a nationwide strike action, we saw I think a day before they could withdraw their labor, government approaching the labor court to interdict this process. That interdict was granted by the labor court, but then it was again challenged by the workers to say that we are appealing this process, meaning that it can't in any way stand. That's why we saw them just last week going on a demonstration on Friday. It was when we saw this matter standing in court, in the Labor Appeals Court, where that matter judgment was reserved for Monday. But they're saying that they are resolute, they are encouraging other unions to join in on their demonstrations as they want to make this as impactful as possible. They're intensifying their strike action.
Well, clearly it seems that they will get that right, because it does seem as though there are other unions wanting to join. And in fact, just after we speak to you, we'll be speaking to the Health and Allied Workers in Indaba trade union, being one of the unions that are saying that they will join the strike. What are you hearing there in terms of perhaps other unions that are willing to join the strike and inevitably intensify the strike action?
So when this impasse started, Flo, there were three federations, major federations within the labor space, the public sector labor space, FEDUSA, COSATU and SAFTU. They were all against the employer's 3%. So when this year started, we saw them losing one federation in FEDUSA, which decided to abandon the fight for 10% and say we are starting the fresh round of talks since we've lost where that is concerned. But then we still have SAFTU and we still have COSATU. They are unions. We're talking about 8 unions here that are basically inching to just all of them withdrawing their labor. This week we are hearing that the young nurses in Daba, they'll be joining in. We're hearing that the workers union, POB crew, policing union, will be joining in as well in terms of withdrawing their labor. Something that is clear to note here is that most of these apex department that you wouldn't want for the services to be crippled in one way or another, but they're saying that they're doing good on that in terms of them just showing the employer of their seriousness of how they've been calling for their wage demands to be adhered to. They're not asking for much. That's what they're telling us. They're asking just for an above inflation wage offer, and they're saying that for them to go back to that 10% is because government imposed that 3%. But if government came to the party and say that, okay, let's look at inflation right now, it's at about 6.7, 6.5%. let's look at where inflation is and let's try a bargain with you where that is concerned. But government, they're saying, did not do that. Instead, they had in Parliament saying that that is not where they negotiate. They saw in Parliament an announcement made, something that frustrated the workers. Right now, they're demonstrating, looking at the fact that they're already at a loss. So even if they say that, okay, it's a no work, no pay, it will kick in, but they're already working at a loss right now with that 3% that kicked in. Most of them, they're saying that they have nothing to show of that 3% that kicked in. Hence, they are not willing to go into the fresh round of talks until that matter from last year is adhered to. And they're looking now at the new minister, Nokolo Kivit, to at least come to the party and help them here, because they're saying that a government at this point in time, they've been negotiating in bad faith, clearly declaring war onto the workers, also taking the opportunity this afternoon in that press briefing flow to plead with the residents to say that really at this point in time, we wouldn't find ourselves where we are if it wasn't government. And they're saying that also they've sent a message out to those that are demonstrating in the 8-9 provinces to say that don't disrupt services, don't do anything that would actually render our demonstration ineffective, and government will portray us here.
That disruption of
services.
services. I mean, you're talking about the withdrawal of services here, and sadly, I saw the Citizen was reporting earlier this week that, in fact, Nehawu has said something like, people's lives are not our responsibility. And is that the tone that is sort of carried on throughout?
They're saying that actually that's a message from the employer, from government, saying that before this strike action could actually get underway, they had set up a meeting with the 9 provinces to say that really looking at all of the health departments to say, come to the party, let's look at the potential impact of this strike action, because we know very well that what we are rendering is an essential service. They were blue ticked there. No one came to the party to kind of try to speak to them. So they're surprised now that all of these hospitals and provinces are now, getting up and trying to shift the blame when they had an opportunity to sit down with the workers to try and minimize impact, to draft all of those, how they can picket and where they can go and what not to do. But that did not happen. So they're saying that if there's anyone to blame for where we find ourselves right now is the employer. But they've sent a message out to their workers, their members, to say that as we demonstrate, let's demonstrate, responsibly, so that government doesn't have a leg to stand on in terms of coming back to say that we have been unruly and rendering our plight as ineffective. But they're saying that they're looking good at continuing with that demonstration as we look to the Labour Appeals Court on Monday, tomorrow, where that judgment will be handed down in terms of giving us an idea of whether this strike action is legal or is deemed illegal right now, looking at that interdict that was brought on by government.
All right, Katlego Legodi, many thanks to you. Of course, you attended that briefing for us here at SABC News, and we certainly do continue with this conversation. As I had said, the Health and Allied Workers Indaba trade union, which represents some 20,000 health workers, say they will be joining the strike by the public sector workers. The union says its members are tired of government's response to workers' demands, which were tabled in the Public Service Coordinating Bargaining Council. Now, let's discuss this further then. We are now joined via Zoom by Lerato Mthunzi, the Health and Allied Workers Indaba Trade Union Secretary General. A very good afternoon to you, ma'am. Thanks for joining us here on SABC News.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all the viewers.
All right, let's talk then about why the Health and Allied Workers Indaba Trade Union has now decided indeed to take part in the strike, and certainly a week later. Why now and why at all?
From our side, we are saying the strike is definitely long overdue if you take the history of where this whole failure in negotiation started occurring. In 2018, when this Resolution 1 of 2018 was signed, 5 out of 8 unions that are in the PSCBC signed, and this agreement was first dubbed as the sellout agreement. And it was said so because it was nearly only the COSATU unions that signed. All independent unions, PSA, HOSPESA, NUPSO and staff who did not sign. However, because they were the majority, this 7% and those above level 8 actually got even less than that 7%. Be as it may, we had to bite the bullet as public servants, and from 2020, when the last leg had to be implemented, the Employer Act shows all the public sector a middle finger. And I think this is where the problem started. Unfortunately, other unions wanted to take this battle on, but there was no enough coordination between the 8 unions. As a result, we are finding ourselves in this mess where the unions took the employer to court and they lost bitterly. Fast forward, we are now in 2023, where a year before the employer decided to act outside the collective bargaining and say, look, I don't care, I'll still win in court, so I will implement unilaterally the 3%. Employees at the public sector are enraged, they're angry, thinking that in 2021, from 2020, we were battling in our hospitals with COVID-19 with no increase in 2021, with no regard from the employer. So you can imagine that the mood is extremely difficult to actually to try and solve it. People are angry, people want their money.
Yeah. Lerato, we've heard reports of deaths and intimidation. And, are you taking a different stance here? Are you going to be taking a different stance from Nehawu? I mean, I was talking to our reporter who is, covering the story about, this particular report that we heard where Nehawu had said that, in essence, what the consequences are not necessarily our responsibility. But, is that something that you as a union will be concerned about? Or is the end goal, what you're concerning yourselves with?
The greatest concern is in any industrial action, we need to see our employees or those we represent having their demands being met. It is very unfortunate that we are dealing with a very arrogant employer. The government that we have so rightfully put in power is extremely arrogant and does not listen to its stakeholders. They've been ignoring unions. They've been really playing hide and seek. And instead of sitting in a round table and coming to an amicable solution, they have made sure that the civilians of this country are actually not paid attention to. The deaths that are actually happening and the unfortunate service delivery that is actually halted is all must be put squarely on the hands and at the shoulders of the employer. The employer must sit on the table with unions and there must be a deal that is struck so that we can continue saving lives. I've spoken with our members. Our members want to continue definitely working once their demands are met. So the people that are delaying this whole deal is the employer wanting to play hide and seek. And I think that's where we are standing. It's been the workers have been way too patient with these negotiations.
Okay, let's talk about what the president had to say this week. He was answering questions in Parliament on Thursday, and the president said, and I'll quote him here: we all are concerned about the violent nature of the strike that is underway. He said that workers in our country have the right to freedom of association and to strike, but that right is not absolute, given that there are certain workers in essential services, particularly for instance in the police service, those who perform very intricate services in the health sector, like doctors and nurses, whose absence and participation in a strike puts lives in danger. How would you respond to this, and how would you perhaps be making sure that even as you strike, the impact of the strike might not necessarily be felt so much by the people on the ground, because your message is essentially to the employer, but the impact is certainly felt by the general public. So how would you respond to that sort of statement by the president?
The president acknowledges that nurses and doctors are essential. The president must make sure that doctors and nurses get an essential pay that is equivalent to the work that they do. Yeah. There cannot be that you want to say something about people, call people the heartbeat, the backbone of the healthcare system, but when it comes to their pay and their benefits and their working conditions, you want to have some form of amnesia. The president must snap out of it, must make sure that public servants get what is due to them, and we are back to normal.
All right, Lerato, thank you very much for giving us your time. Then we'll certainly keep up to date with this strike action. That is Lerato Mthunzi the Health and Allied Workers Indaba Trade Union General Secretary, who has confirmed indeed that they will indeed be joining the strike action. We're going to take a short break. More news coming up after this. Stay with us.